Hi, Bill. Hey, Chris. Got it. Okay. All right, 1, 2, 3, and 4, 12, 13. I think this is all of us. Let me I want to get started quickly because you came here not to listen to me, but to listen to Andy. And I just learned this morning that Jake would be joining us from Commissioner Ryan's Safe Rest Village team. So he's agreed to also make himself available to answer some questions. Andy told me he didn't need 2 hours to brief us on, it was 30 to 40 minutes to brief us on his presentation. So we will, that little windfall of time will give us some time to answer questions ask some questions of Jake as well, which I think makes this meeting even more opportune. So just know that if your questions, so we'll start with Andy he says he has a 15, 20-minute presentation. And then I will thank you for submitting your questions. I've done the best I could to sort of combine them thematically. And just know that if you don't hear your question directed to Andy by me, you'll have an opportunity to address Andy directly. Either this afternoon, there will be a session of live questioning, and also tomorrow evening, Andy's going to be at the general meeting for about 45 minutes. Yeah, I would like to ask everyone please to mute themselves for this next presentation. The chat room is closed while Andy is making his presentation, and while I'm directing questions to him that you have submitted in advance. We won't be acknowledging raised hands either. So just, get over it. So Andy, the stage is yours here.
Thank you, Peter, and thanks everyone for the opportunity to come and be with you to share a little bit about the work of All Good Northwest, a little bit about our story, and then just to be available for your questions. So All Good Northwest is a pretty doggone new operation. However, we're a new operation with quite a bit of experience. I come to this work from, we're kind of All Good is sort of a spin-off organization of the previous agency that I worked for, which is called Do Good Multnomah. Do Good Multnomah has been around for almost 7 years now, doing sheltering, support services, and housing, primarily of veterans experiencing houselessness. And essentially, we realized I've also been on the board of Do Good for a few years now, and because there's unfortunately a lot of work in this area to do, and seems to be ever growing need, Do Good continued to be tapped to do work that was not veteran specific. And so I was at the time serving as the director of emergency management for that organization, and the executive director and myself and the deputy director decided, well, let's start another nonprofit with the same sort of mission, but not veteran specific. And so we started a 501c3 and we became an organization. And very quickly after that, the Joint Office of Homeless Services realized what we had done and said, well, we have a project for you. And largely based on my background, my sheltering experience is in a number of different shelter settings. I started doing this work as a half-time overnight shelter manager at the church that I used to pastor in North Portland called Portsmouth Union Church. For many years, we had a volunteer-based overnight shelter for severe weather. And that developed into a winter shelter. And out of that, once COVID-19 hit, that shelter moved over to the Charles Jordan Community Center. And I just continued to move more and more into this work, eventually becoming a director of emergency management, where I oversaw 2 different congregate shelter settings, 3 different motel shelter settings, and then the development of an implementation of the St. John's Village project, which I understand some of you are familiar with and have had a chance to talk to my good friend Tara and have some conversation. And I was part of the design team for that and actually helped to procure that space for that village, because I believe in the village model of alternative sheltering. So based on all of that experience, the Joint Office said, well, all good, welcome to the party. And we have a project that we'd like you to consider doing. And that is to take over oversight and management of 3 existing villages. At the time, they were known as the C3PO villages. 2 of them are culturally specific, a BIPOC village and a QA affinity village, a queer affinity village. And then the 3rd one is an all-inclusive village. And basically, they tapped us to turn the model. These villages were not sustainable in the model that they were in, and they said, we would love to see you be able to transform these into an alternative shelter site that's more like St. John's Village, but with additional staffing, additional resources. And so they asked us to do that work in the middle of August of 2021. And because we have a reputation of being able to stand up projects and do things fairly quickly when asked to do so, the Joint Office said, can you be ready to go on October 1st? This was the middle of August. And we said, either because we're either ambitious or slightly crazy, we said, yeah, we can do it. And so we hired upwards of 60 staff, including new directors and leadership team, and very quickly became an organization. I will be honest with you, since we started our work October 1st, we find ourselves building the proverbial airplane as it's in the air. We continue to grow and to develop. However, we've also found that we have some success because we've hired an amazing team of folks. So the All Good model of village sheltering is actually even differentiates from Do Good's model in one specific way, in a few ways from the St. John's Village model, but in some key ways from the overall sheltering model at Do Good. So for all of our villages, we employ 24/7 staffing, and that includes case management, housing navigation, and peer support. And probably the biggest addition, the biggest, most innovative piece of our model is that at every site that we have had the opportunity to serve and to oversee, we hire a full-time behavioral health specialist to be a part of this wraparound team on site. So every villager is surrounded with support in the form of case management and peer support. And then there's a housing navigation person, because that's ultimately our goal. Our logo has a little key on it, because all of the work that we seek to do is to move people toward independence. Our hope is that that's in the form of housing, a permanent supportive housing, permanent housing. And so in the brief amount of time we've been an organization, we've been around for 6 months, we've managed to house 20 people out of those 3 villages already. And we just want to see that continue to increase. Having the behavioral health staff on site we found it to be a game changer, because when people are supported, not just with somebody who's saying, okay, what are your next steps, but with someone who's saying, we see that you're identifying your next steps, but also have some barriers that we'd like to walk with you and help to try to mitigate. And so that's, for us, it's exciting to get to do that work. And we are thrilled to be asked to do more of it. We will be opening next month. We'll be overseeing an opening 120 bed congregate shelter setting on Market Street, Southeast Market Street. And then we've obviously been asked to oversee this new Safe Rest Village by the city, and we're excited to have the opportunity to do that. So yeah, that's kind of who we are and where we've been and how we ended up doing this. I don't know if there's more that you would have me share without being prompted by questions, I guess. And I'll open myself up to that.
Great. Thank you, Andy. I do have a long list of questions, but here's one that just popped up in my mind as you were speaking, and that is, what would you What would you say are the most significant differences between the St. John's Village, which some of our members have had an opportunity to see, and we've arranged another site visit this coming Saturday. So a lot of us will have seen St. John's. And what would you say the biggest differences are between that model and what you hope to implement in Multnomah?
Quite frankly, it's the staffing and support model. St. John's Village is staffed by 3 full-time staff, and they don't have 24/7 staffing. And so they rely in the evening on camera surveillance and reports from the surrounding community. They also have a smaller village. There's only 19 pods there. And so the ability to build community and pretty tight-knit community that holds one another accountable is a little different. And there's a little bit of a different, from last I'd heard, maybe a little bit of a different screening mechanism. But the biggest difference between that and the Safe Rest Village, or the All Good model, that's Do Good who oversees that project, is the fact that we have people on the ground 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And what that does is it's super great for obviously for participants, for villagers who have access to staff to help meet resources whenever they need them. So should there be an issue in the village in the middle of the night, and we've got a villager who ends up having some kind of medical need or some kind of mental health crisis, we've got a staff person right there to help get that person the support they need at that moment. But additionally, it means that the surrounding neighbors, should there be some kind of issue, should they hear something and they're concerned and they want to reach out, the village phone is staffed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So there's a number, and the number's on all of our websites, and we'll make sure, or on our website for all of our projects, and we'll make sure that the community has that number. So if they're concerned about something, they can reach out. All hours a day, somebody's going to be on that phone to answer questions or to help. And they may not have the answer if it's not village related, but they can help direct and be a resource. So for us, that staffing modality, that service modality is huge. And it's a big departure from what's at St. John's Village.
Thanks, Andy. So I have about 17 or 18 questions. Some of them are multi-part questions.
Only 17 or 18?
Only 17. Okay, so each one is 3 questions.
I'm here for it. Let's go.
Okay, so here we go. In general, folks, I've arranged these questions so they're, in general, they go from more specific to more general and or more broad. And also in general, they go from sort of through the evolution process of what the village what we may see in the village as it's implemented and then evolves. So here we go, Andy. What will be your staffing numbers, as in, for example, ratio of staff to residents, types of staffing roles? Will there be one person to act as the neighborhood's contact for communication?
Yes, so we have, great question. The primary contact person for the neighborhood will be the program manager. So once we've established and determined the program manager for this village, you'll have that particular person's contact information to reach out via email or work phone. So that'll be the primary point of contact. We have our ratio of staff to participants. We keep our caseloads low intentionally. So for example, each case manager has 5 or 6 folks that they're overseeing, which if you ask anyone doing this work throughout the city, that's ridiculously low. But we're intentional about that because establishing rapport and relationship with that individual and having that wraparound attention affords this person the best opportunity to really be able to dive into what they need to do in order to see them transition to independence. Staffing, there's a totality of 17 to 20 staff. There's always at least 3 staff on site at all times. Particular times and days, it's going to look different. Wednesday, all hands are on deck to take care of all kinds of projects and things like that. But there's typically, unless it's an extenuating circumstance, there's at least 3 staff on site at all times.
Great, thank you. Where will referrals come from? What will the admissions process look like? And how much, if any, discretion will All Good have when it comes to refusing to accept individuals referred to the facility for any reason other than a lack of capacity?
Well, as the program managers, as the people doing oversight, ultimately, whether or not an individual is a good fit for the village, it's our responsibility. We have to pay attention to that. And so if someone, even if we take someone into the village and it turns out that this person is not a good fit, we have to make the determination about whether or not that person continues to be a part of the program. So that's a lengthy way of saying, in terms of referrals, that process is still in development, but we are held accountable via our contract for folks that are in the village. I see Jake has a hand up, probably wants to follow up on some of that.
Yeah, Jake, anytime you want to jump in, or Andy, anytime you want to say, Jake, take it away.
Yeah, you
Feel
can,
free.
Andy, you can pass it to me and I'll just, yeah, anytime. Yeah, so the process for referrals is still being developed by the joint office. Hopefully we'll get a little bit more concrete plan here soon. The person that was developing was out for a little while. So it's going to look a little bit like the shelter set aside program. It's kind of based off of that model, and referring agencies. I think we talked about this quite a bit. Like first responders, so that includes like park rangers, firefighters, and other people that work in that realm. And then there's going to be navigation teams that are sent out with like the impact reduction team, other social service providers, but that's only a referral, right? So a couple of things that go along with that. So that main process is what we want to do is we want to make sure that when somebody is referred to a village, that there's a bed available for them, right? So that's why that referral process is there, is we're ensuring that there's a bed in place for them. And then what happens from there is that person then has to make it to there, right? What I mean, some of them are going to be giving cabs probably or rides to it. Some of them might want to find their own way. And then, the shelter operator, and Andy touched on this a little bit, but it's awesome. Ultimately their responsibility to ensure that the person is the right fit for that space, right? So if somebody shows up and they're like, they don't want to participate in the model, and they don't, then Andy still has to, invite them in, right? They have to, come into services, right? What do you say? Screen in, right? Andy likes to say screen in, right? So screening people into services. And so just because somebody's referred does not necessarily mean that they'll show up to the village or be in the village. But our hope is that we can find somewhere better for them. If it's not the right fit.
Great. Thank you, Jake. Okay, Andy, back to you. Will high impact camps be the main source of residents, and will it be used to legitimize sweeps? Can you explain how the housing first approach will be applied here?
I can't answer the first part because I don't know. I don't know how we justify. That's outside of my wheelhouse or my speaking point. The way that we look at housing first as an agency, I can just talk about that and say that we're wholly committed to it, because we see that in order for people to be able to mitigate barriers, they have to have the basic human right of shelter, of having a roof over their head. And once that happens, once people are in a safe space, then we can begin to do some work with them when they're ready to do that work. But being in the middle of the trauma that is living on the streets makes it so much harder for folks to be able to mitigate barriers and move toward ultimately where we want them to be, which is in safe and secure housing. So that's the way we look at it. And then also our housing navigation folks are fully committed to the housing first model as well. And so have relationships with landlords and with property management, and can say, this is this person's their income, these are the things, this is who they are, and work their magic to get folks inside and continue to hopefully provide those wraparound support services while they're housed so that they can retain their housing.
Great. Jake, did you want to add anything about the parts of that question that Andy said were out of his wheelhouse?
Do you mind repeating it real quick? I'm sorry.
Yeah, will high impact camps be the main source of residents? Will it be used to legitimize sweeps?
We get asked that question a lot. So the impact reduction team and the safe rest. I want to get away from the narrative that by creating more shelters that we're going to be justifying like sweeping people, right? Or the impact reduction team work, right? We need to create more spaces for people to go to. But right now we don't know how many people are on the streets, but there's over 2,000, at least the last point in time count. There's only 1,600 shelter beds from the last time I heard. There's just not enough space for people to go. So the intent is not that it can be used in that way. We're trying to create more shelter space for people that are living outside, right? To give them safe places to go. As far as that, they'll have the capacity to refer, but other agencies are also going to have the capacity to refer. And without, I haven't been asked the question of if they'll refer more than other agencies. And so I don't know, I'll have to think about that one a little bit. I don't really have an answer for that one. I'd have to ask and talk to people. And maybe that's something that we'll figure out when we develop the process a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Andy, back to you. Would you walk us through All Good's process for facilitating residents' access to appropriate healthcare services, mental health and substance abuse counseling, employment opportunities, and ultimately transitioning into permanent, stable, appropriately supportive housing? You've described some of that already, but if you can elaborate, that'd be great.
Sure. So the first thing we do is work to establish relationship and trust and rapport. And that's where the case manager comes in. A person is assigned a case manager, and if that case manager and that participant, that villager don't, we use those terms interchangeably, by the way, participant and villager. So if that isn't a relationship that works, then we try to find one that's going to work so that this person can trust the first person that they're working with, and they also get connected to our behavioral health specialist, or BHS person who's at the site. And so they start to ask the basics when it comes to barriers, things like ID, income, birth certificate, anything that any kind of housing past that they might have, any kind of record that they have of eviction, anything like that. And so they're working with the folks to mitigate those barriers and get people what we call housing ready. And that can take quite a bit of time and quite a bit of work. And we don't coerce folks. We don't force them. This is on people's own timeline, with an understanding that there is a limited amount of time to be in the shelter, but we're trying to work with them and not force and not forcefully direct people in a direction. We started this organization because we believe in the intrinsic good of all individuals. And we believe in treating everyone like a human being. And part of that is recognizing that it's going to take some relationship development. And as people do that, as people start to realize, oh, wait, I am housable, there's hope here, then the navigation specialist is able to kind of come in alongside and go, okay, let's start getting this person on this particular wait list for this permanent supportive housing project or this particular apartment. Or if it's not housing, we realize that sometimes it isn't about getting people housed, but it's about the next step on their journey. And that may be reconnecting with family. It may be going into treatment, it'd be whatever the next thing may be for them. That's what we're working to do. And so the behavioral health team and the case manager and the navigation specialist all come around and work with that individual to get them to the place where they're ready to move into their own housing. And then they're working with them too. And this is one of the better parts of this job, is once we're able to hand people keys to be able to help them resource furniture, resource the things you need to have your own space, and then to stay in relationship so that person doesn't feel isolated and disconnected. There's my dream as an organization. We're only 6 months old, so this is a dream, but Eventually, I would like to see us have a retention team, a team of specialists whose sole job is to stay connected with folks that we've housed and make sure that they continue to have the resources they need, that they had in the village at one point, that they may not have such immediate access to. Because what we don't want to do is send people into a cycle that's all too familiar, where they're not able to retain their housing for one reason or another. Then they're back out on the street with an eviction, making it that much harder to house them the next time. We want to break that cycle. So that's part of the work that we do right now. Even though we're not contracted to do it, we do it because we want to treat people like human beings and we don't want to leave them isolated. But eventually, we'd like to have that be a part of the wraparound support that we can lend from the street all the way into supportive housing.
Whatever the number of villagers there may end up being, for the sake of example here, let's say 50, would they all have the same case manager? Or you have a rotating team of case managers?
Oh, we have several case managers. Like I said, a case manager on our staff is, I think the max somebody has is 7. We just keep a very low ratio on purpose. We just find that it's so much more successful if you've worked in an agency where you have a caseload of 50 folks. You're just checking off checklists. You're not doing relationship. You're not doing the actual wraparound. It's just, or at least it's more difficult to do that. And we want to up the humanity in the work.
Some shelters require residents to commit to being drug-free and sober during residency. Can you assure the residents of the Sears Safe Rest Village will follow a similar code of conduct?
No, this is a low barrier shelter, and that's the reality. Is we have policies in place that say do not put staff or other villagers at risk by having drugs and alcohol. But folks, I've said this a bajillion times, and it doesn't stop being true. There is use at every single shelter setting anywhere, even clean and sober ones people use. We're committed to harm reduction strategies in a low barrier shelter, which acknowledges the fact that some people are going to make choices in their behaviors, and we want to mitigate harm as much as possible and not to stigmatize or chastise or isolate folks for the activities that they are engaging in. When we do that, we re-trigger and we re-traumatize, and we risk any kind of progress that we might make with someone. And we have quite a bit of progress with people, even as they're active in their use. We're able to get them what they need and to get them housed, and they can be good members of the community. And so we're not looking to screen people out, we're looking to keep people in. That said, there's clear expectations around what should be happening in the village, and we make those clear to our participants.
Great. Will there be on-site off-street parking for staff, residents, and guests of residents?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I think so. I hope so.
I see Jake
Parking
laughing.
is an issue. Yeah, at the other villages, this is an issue. But when I've gone out to see the property only once, and I haven't been with a project manager who can point out where everything's going to go. So my hope is yes, and I'm going to push for that. But we'll have to see.
Yeah,
that's a project management question.
So Jake, tell us why you were laughing.
Oh, it's a commonly asked question. I think Andy and I have talked about parking a lot in previous meetings about other shelters. And so, yeah, it's something, there's space on the property, but I'm not sure exactly what the site plan is yet. And I think that's something, unfortunately, the person doing that development or that process was out last week. And we'll be able to meet with Andy hopefully later this week, and they can start to figure that stuff out. So let's hope that there are. I do want to say, like, most, and Andy can probably talk to this more than I can, most participants don't come with vehicles, so it's mostly just staff that need parking. So it's very few parking spaces. Sorry, parking spaces.
Yep. Sure. Very true.
Andy, you may have spoken to this already. If you have, forgive me, but what hours? Well, SRV will be staffed 24/7. How many specifically, like overnight, will be on staff overnight?
Currently, we have 3 people scheduled overnight.
Overnight.
Every night. And we're going to try to keep that robust staffing in the evening. It allows for staff to get breaks during the night to just swap out and all of that. So it should be 3. Jake?
Mhm. And is it like 4 nights on, 3 nights off, or something like that?
Yeah, we typically work 410s. Those are the
410,
shifts that we
okay.
have. So yeah.
Right. Okay, the numbers game here. What do you anticipate as the maximum number of residents at our SRV? Is there a number specified by your contract? How long might it take to max out on capacity?
Andy,
Hey.
I'll take the beginning of that one. So the anticipated size of it, and this is not for finalized yet. So the anticipated size is about 35 units, which are sleeping units. Most people come as an individual. Some people can come as a couple. I would anticipate that you would never see more than 40 people there. Most couples, when they come in, when another unit opens up, they sleep in separate units. But some people do stay together. So most likely not more than 40. As far as the contract question, I think we asked all of them to be able to accept up to 60, but that's more of a general term because any of the Safe Rest Village, that's the max that we can have at any site. This site will only have 35-ish units, so it's not going to be much larger.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then what was the third part of that question?
Well, I'm wondering just, given the amount of attention that you put into screening and placing people in the village, how long might it take before we hit capacity? I mean, 4 months, for a year? You don't know.
I mean, that's a good question. I would hope that we get people there quick, right? Like, let's start getting people services. If we got staff there, if it's ready to go, then let's get people in. Let's start connecting people to resources. Sorry, Andy, you unmuted, so you go ahead.
Well, I'm right there with you. As far as I'm concerned, it should, if we're not up to full capacity in that village in a matter of a couple 3 weeks, then we're not really doing our job very well. The job is to move folks into shelter so that we can start to provide the services to move them. I mean, sheltering is the first step, but the end to houselessness in our city is through housing. And so that's the work that we need to start doing. So we want to start doing it sooner rather than later. I don't like to have empty units. I don't like to have empty beds. I don't like to have empty spaces. And so as soon as we can get folks in, and as long as the staff has capacity, of course, to do all of that, yeah, we want to do it sooner rather than later.
Okay. So what do at other shelter villages or shelter centers, what do most villagers do on a typical day? Is there a typical day? Do most of them stay in their pods? Do they stay in the village? Do they walk the neighborhood? Do they meet with their counselors? Do they ride the bus downtown? All of the above?
Yeah, I would say that's kind of asking this group, what does your typical day look like? You're all different people with different lives and different needs. And so the same is true. There's no typical day. We have some folks who sleep in real late and stay up real late, like some of us might do. We have folks who work. We have folks who go off to their job and are trying to earn, and then that income so that we can, and that helps to assist them to move into housing. We have folks who spend their day seeking out health resources, and some who just kick it in the village with their case manager and with one another. So, I mean, it's really, I mean, these are human beings with all kinds of stories and all kinds of different needs. We're just there for all of it.
Mm-hmm. What's the process when conflict arises between residents? What are the credentials and experience of staff who may find themselves in such situations? And for a Sears an SRV guest who behaves in a way that negatively impacts the neighborhood or the village, where is that guest removed to?
Yeah. So I'll answer the first question. That is, all of our staff receive training in de-escalation and in assertive engagement, both. We are continuing to develop. I won't say it's there because we're only 6 months into doing this work, but our training, we recently hired a full-time training and safety manager who is making sure that all of our staff have de-escalation training in addition to CPR and Narcan and all of those kinds of things. when we have conflict that takes place in the village, the first thing is to try to de-escalate that conflict. I mean, separating the two villagers and saying, let's take a deep breath. If you're a smoker, have a smoke, and let's try to relax before we come together and try to figure out how to deal with that, how to resolve the conflict. If it's a conflict that becomes physical, then we have to remove the participants from the village situation. So they may have to spend some time out of the village, have a time out, which might be helpful for them. If a villager, the basic overall guideline, rule, thing that we cling to is you have to be a good community member. And we spell that out in our intake process and in the village handbook, what that looks like for us. But if someone's causing an issue in the neighborhood, that's not being a good community member. If someone's causing conflict in the village, that's not being a good community member. And so it starts with a conversation and treating people like human beings and seeing if we can work it out that way. And if after a certain amount of time, we just can't come to a place where that individual can be a good community member, then unfortunately we do end up needing to exit them from the program. Our goal is to exit folks into another opportunity. And so this is why we have good relationships with other community partners, with other shelter settings. It may be that this individual doesn't work in the village, but they do work well in a congregate setting, or maybe there's an opportunity in a motel setting, or in another village with another organization. We do everything in our power to have a resource for someone that we exit from the village. It's why the relationship with Do Good and their congregate settings, and then we'll have a congregate setting as well next month that we'll be able to offer as an option to folks.
Mm-hmm. What opportunities will housed neighbors have to interact with and get to know village residents and village staff? Will you be able to accommodate volunteers from the neighborhood to help with various aspects of village life?
So that, I'll be honest with you, that's been trickier with COVID and also with confidentiality. We would love to be able to open things up and have people have relationships with the villagers. The reality is sometimes folks, we're committed to confidentiality and to making sure that folks feel safe, and that we will not tell anyone if someone is at the village. It's the common refrain we train everybody when someone calls and asks if someone's there is, I can either confirm or deny that individual is with us, but I'd be glad to take a message in case we happen to see them at some point in time. For that reason, also, we have folks who are sheltering in sanctuary from DV situations, who are really nervous when any stranger shows up in the setting. And so we have to be really mindful of that. Having said that, we do have volunteer groups that will come in and do some construction projects, some ramp building or garden bed building or things like that. And sometimes we have volunteers that are able to come in and do some programming for villagers. So the opportunities are there. I guess I don't want to put it out there right away because we have to establish connection to the community and also make sure that folks understand the confidentiality piece.
Great. Will there be a focus on building community and maximizing co-governance as there is at St. John's Village?
All villagers have a voice, and we want to hear that voice. And we want to hear their perspective, and we want to hear their thoughts, and we want to hear how they think things could be better or different or what they want. And so we have a weekly village meeting where that's a part of the program. Whether or not there will be a co-governance model, we haven't gotten there yet. We're just not there.
Okay. Will you keep updated, accurate records of incidents that occur in and around the SRV? Resident intake, number of transition to permanent housing, number evicted, emergency service calls, neighborhood complaints. How will those reports be made? Assuming you keep those records, how will those be made available or shared?
We have a responsibility contractually to do that to the Joint Office of Homeless Services. So all of those things are noted, all of those things are tracked, all of those things are recorded. and probably access to them if someone is interested, as much as can be shared, because again, with confidentiality, could probably be accessed to the Joint Office of Homeless Services.
Mhm. So requests would go to joint office rather than.
Yeah, just reach out if you want to know, if you're interested in how many, and we have to report it out. If you're interested, how
Right.
is All Good actually doing at that housing thing they care so much about? Definitely that'd be a place to reach out.
Right. Hey, at what stage in the process of drafting a good neighbor agreement, which is where our neighborhood association is right now, do you typically get involved, if at all? Can we contact you directly with questions about your operation and your services, or will we have to direct questions to Jake's team or through the county, the joint office? Or you just want to
Yeah.
stay away from drafting good neighbor agreements?
Here's what I'll tell you. That's why I'm here. I'm here because I want to be involved, and I'm involved now. So the point in the process is, hi everyone, here I am, and let's continue to do the work together. Whether or not I think that written agreements are important. They're important for accountability, and they're important for communication. We all need to know who to call, right? That to me is what the real value of a good neighbor agreement comes into play. But that, for me, more important than the good neighbor agreement is to actually be invested in being good neighbors and to be in relationships. So showing up and being available for communication is, to me, it's primary. It's why I show up in these spaces. And while I'll continue to do so, I want you all to have a face and have a number and have a contact. Jake, I'm sure, is in the same boat. We're available to reach out. And I have been a part of good neighbor agreements from the very formation. I've drafted good neighbor agreements and offered them. It really depends on who takes their part of the lead in it. But I'm here for all of that.
Great. And our neighborhood association, as do most, have a monthly meeting for general members. And right now, our little SRV working group is meeting more or less twice a month. And can we assume that you'll join us at these meetings as a key stakeholder and for communication and problem solving around concerns that have come up, and volunteer coordination if that should ever evolve?
Yeah, what I can offer is, and it may not be me, it may actually be the program manager that we hire to work at this particular site. And I'm also not going to avail that person for all of them. But if you have a need, and if there's a regularity that you want to work with that program manager about showing up and being a voice, being a presence, or submitting some kind of report, we can definitely work on that. We don't want to be strangers. We don't want you like wondering where have they been and what are they doing. So, but at the same time, I don't want to schedule time for someone we haven't even hired yet.
Good point. So I understand completely some of the constraints on incorporating volunteers into the village community, but can housed neighbors wishing to make financial contributions to All Good Northwest's work in Multnomah be sure their donations will be applied to the SRV in Multnomah?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, if you want to give money, we can make sure. First of all, thank you for even bringing that up. As an executive director of the organization, you're doing some of my work for me, and I appreciate it. But if you do want to support the work of All Good and have it be pointed toward that particular village, we can definitely have that conversation. Contributions are super helpful, and we're also probably will end up having a list of things that if people want to contribute, maybe not just monies, but if there are needs for blankets, or if there are needs for when it gets colder, I'm going to tell you, we're gonna put things out for hand warmers. That's like gold in some of these shelter settings. So there will be some of those things. What I would love to do is to have this team and the neighbors work with the actual program manager there to have to make sure that contributions are actual things that are needed. I'm going to be honest, y'all. Haven't done this shelter work for a while. Very good intentioned people will go to the trouble of creating little bags of needs for everyone. And one, oftentimes those things aren't what people are actually needing. And two, oftentimes we dump out the bags and separate the items into giant bins, which is easier for us to use in the shelter setting. So I don't want to waste anybody's time, and I want people to be able to contribute meaningfully, and that's where communication with the program manager comes in. So I think that'll be really helpful.
Great, great. Have you found in your work over many years, and not just the last 6 months, but do you find that doubts and suspicions and opposition by neighbors in your other villages have dissipated over time, as was indicated in the recent study released by Portland State University?
Yes, and I'll cite St. John's as the prime example of that, the St. John's Village. I have never experienced, first of all, never experienced lack of civility and behavior like I did at some neighborhood association meetings in St. John's. And the fear which people had that was translated into threats, into threats of lawsuits, all kinds of, and just genuine concern, particularly because that site is located within a stone's throw of 2 different schools. And this was a genuine concern. Once we started operation there and maintained communication, we actually found that neighbors who were adamantly and viciously opposed to the village, I've had them reach out to me and say, I was wrong. It's lovely to have this village here. I'm thankful to have these new neighbors. It's not perfect, but it's definitely not what I thought this was going to be. And I particularly am encouraged by the relationship we've been able to maintain with the elementary school. And that's largely because my wife works in that elementary school as a kindergarten instructional assistant. So I have some personal investment in making sure that kids are safe. I'm a former educator myself. I taught high school. I have 2 children, school-age children. And so all of those concerns I want to hear. And I found that in the neighborhoods that we've set these up, that, yeah, a lot of times the initial concern, it's what I call fear of the blue tarp, because the thinking is, well, these villages are going to look like a home. They're just going to set up homeless camps. And that was what the neighbors thought. You're just putting a homeless camp in our neighborhood. But that's not what we're looking to do at all. We're looking to, in fact, we don't even like to call these camps. We don't like to use that word because of the connotation. Instead, we're looking to have village life here, and people living in dignified structures with humane services. So yeah, we have a tendency to, at least that's what I discovered in St. John's. And I know it's just one experience of that, but as that study showed, I think that tends to be the trend.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you so much, Andy. And Jake, are you good for 3 or 4 questions? Okay, so everyone, some of your questions, once Jake joined this session, some of your questions seemed more appropriate to direct to him. So I'm going to do that right now, and then we'll open it up for direct questions from any and all of you. And we'll hope you all get a chance to ask at least one question. So Jake, the most obvious impact the SRV will be visual. Will there be an opportunity for housed neighbors to see or comment on the village design?
So yes and no. So this is one of those, everybody hates me because I can't answer this with a for sure, right? But what it is like there's certain things like, so an architect recently got together with our site developer, came up with a site plan of like kind of the way it's going to look, and that stuff was submitted for permitting. That's my understanding of how that system works. I'm not the person. So so the site plan will pretty much be that way. What, you know, Andy talked a little bit about this as well. Like there are chances for community input on certain things like gardens or maybe painting the fence or things like that. So it's going to be, there's some things that aren't, and that's the site plan. and the shelter units. Those things we have to go through a procurement process and get. Other things like maybe like potted plants inside the space, or things like that. Sure. And that's going to be kind of, we're going to figure it out together what we can and what we can't. Everybody wants a list of like, what can we have input on and what can't we have input on. I don't have an exhaustive list of that. So and I understand that uncertainty is not awesome for you all. I can appreciate that. But yeah, that's where we're at.
That's what it is. So is All Good Northwest contract, is it with joint office or is it with the city? Joint
It's with the joint office. Yeah, we have an IGA
And-
with the county. Yeah.
And is that a matter of public record? Can we see that contract or not?
Anything that the joint office is doing that's not protected by attorney-client privileges should be public record.
Great.
To my understanding, I'm not a public record, like I should say that we're being recorded. So like, I'm not,
Right.
I am not the end all be all on understanding public records requests.
Right. But it's not unreasonable to think that we could request to see a copy of that document. Yeah. Acknowledging that you are not a public contracts attorney.
Yeah. Yeah. I would hate for somebody to be like, but Jake said, and I'm like, ooh.
So one of the potential players in this environment is a impact reduction team. And do we like request one, or are we assigned one, or are they brought in on sort of case by case as circumstances require, or how's that work?
Yeah. So I'm not, again, I'm just going to keep having to say this. I'm not the expert on things, but that's okay. You're asking good questions. I'll tell you what I do understand. So the impact reduction team is as a program in the city. It falls underneath the Office of Finance and Management.
But in Portland rather than the joint office of the county.
Yeah, it falls underneath the city of Portland.
Okay.
And they do all sorts of work. So some of the work that they do are they have navigation teams or individuals. These people will go out and meet with our unhoused neighbors and other people in our community to help connect them with resources. That number used to be 5. It's getting moved up to 45 now, with 20 of those people specifically meant to prioritize around safe rest villages in Portland, right? So as far as people getting assigned, I don't know how they're going to divvy out the work, but we have made the investments to say there will be people interacting with houseless folks around the safe rest villages. As far as any other, the impact reduction team is a lot of the time done by a report model, PDX reporter. It's hard for them to know to do work if they're not told about it, right? It'd be like your mechanic showing up to your house and doing an oil change, right? Like it doesn't, so they need to be notified that something's going on. And that's, so that will be up to community members and to report that kind of stuff.
Great. One last question for you before we open up. So how involved would the Safe Rest Village team be once our village is up and running? Are you guys then off to the next 2 villages, or you're?
That's, I want to say like we're committed to the work. So my plan is to continue to show up to meetings and at least be able to help address issues as they come up. I'm really confident that All Good's going to do a great job and that you won't need me. And that's the hope, right? But we want to see this work and we want to be at the table and we want to participate in this project. Of what that looks like yet, I don't know, but I'm committed to the work. Andy's committed to the work. So yeah.
Great. Thank you. Thanks to both of you. Okay, everybody, here's your chance to ask a question. I'm going to be a little bit of a timekeeper here. We'll give you a generous minute and try to keep your questions really specific and really narrow so everyone has an opportunity to ask a question. And we will start with Karen. Why don't you unmute yourself and go for it? You got 75 seconds.
Hi, Andy. A couple of my questions got truncated. A follow-up would be, since All Good has discretion to refuse access, could you please detail under what circumstances you would choose to exercise that discretion? For example, outstanding warrants? And my other question is the plan of record to stand down this facility at the end of 36 months with all the homeless residents safely housed? Is that part of the contract?
I can't really get into details of why we would exclude somebody or screen somebody out. We typically find ourselves screening folks in more often than not. I think what it would probably be is more of a conversation around the realities of the village. And quite frankly, folks realizing either proximity to resources or otherwise that this is not going to be a good fit. There's also, we have behavioral health staff as well who may be able to ascertain just from the conversation that we can't meet this person's mental health needs in this particular format, or we can't meet their physical health needs. There's a certain, I mean, we are not hired to be caretakers for individuals who have physical needs that are beyond what we are capable of taking care of. And so sometimes we have folks who show up and we're like, we're sorry, but we don't have that capacity, but we can reach out to Age and Disability and see what we can do about finding resources that do more closely match you. In terms of the question around the plan for the contract of this, I don't know the answer to that question. We're going to show up and do the work for as long as we are tasked with doing that. I don't know, Jake, if you have more insight about it. I'm sorry, Karen, I don't know.
I don't have a lot of information, but I do want to just address, like, shelters do open and close. Like, that is not a rare thing. It does happen. Not everyone that was in the shelter is going to find permanent housing, right? And so the idea is that that's a good opportunity when a shelter is closing down for us to send in people to help connect people to other resources to maybe find them the next step that will then help them get into more permanent housing, right? So yeah, the joint office opens and closes shelters all the time.
So just to clarify then, this contract is open-ended. There is no termination date on this contract. It's not time limited. And so am I to understand then that people with outstanding warrants, for example, would presumably not be excluded? Just to give you as an example, outstanding warrants, domestic violence issues, while housing victims of domestic violence in the same shelter. There are concerns about not just neighborhood safety, but the safety of the residents.
100%, and that's where we would make a determination on whether or not that individual would be a good fit.
So outstanding warrants would not be a screen out?
We make the determination based on an individual basis. We don't have an automatic screen out of that, no.
So we'll take that.
Thanks, Karen. Kevin, you're next.
Andy, could you save us the trouble of making a public records request to the joint office and just send us a copy of the operator's agreement, since apparently it's ultimately would be available, and you could save us the trouble of going through the bureaucracy to obtain it if you're willing.
Yeah, I don't have that yet. We've just been named the operators of this, so I don't have an operator's agreement in place. It will be soon. As soon as it is, I'll send it to you if you want to take a look at it. No problem.
Thanks, Kevin. Joan, why don't you unmute yourself?
I had submitted a question about the construction equipment around the site and the trucks going in and out. And maybe Jake, I know you might know more about this, about how are we going to ensure the safety of the residents there with that kind of traffic?
Yeah, so we've been talking to our partners at PBOT about the construction going on there. My understanding is that it should be done in the fall. I might be a little bit off on that, and things always move around a little bit, so it's not going to be super long term. We've talked about windows to make sure that things aren't happening all the time, and this is just something that we want to make sure that there's a good relationship between them and Andy and whoever the shelter operator is on site or manager is on site, right? To just make sure that people know, like, hey, there is construction equipment moving around here. Let's be cognizant about where we're walking, So for us, it's really about just developing that relationship and making sure people know what's going on there. And then, yeah, as far as I understand, that construction equipment won't be there forever.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joan. Robin, you're next. Unmute yourself. There you go.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that a lot of people are worried about is what happens outside the Safe Rest Village around the edges. There are people whose houses are right next to it. The school is very close to it. And I guess I'm hoping you could maybe comment on things like trash around the village on the outside of the walls. And then also a big worry is, do people who are tenting or surviving on the street tend to congregate close to a Safe Rest Village, maybe with hopes of contacting someone in there or hopes of getting services? Have you observed that to be a problem at other villages? Because I think that is a big worry here.
Andy, you're welcome to take this one, but I can start it if you want. I'll start off by just talking a little bit about the ancillary camping, because it's one of the most common questions I get. So one of the ideas that people have when they see, as we think about the emergency outdoor shelters that were set up at the beginning of COVID, and a lot of people did congregate around them because they were meeting people's needs through this emergency, right? And so they were providing them with food and water and other services outside the gate. And so that's a particular reason why we chose, and when we've talked to our service providers about not providing services to people that are not in the shelter, right? And why the referral system exists, right? So people have no reason to be outside the village, or at least limited reasons to be outside the village, right? This site's also, sorry, Andy can talk a little bit more about that, but I just want to really clarify that. So we're not seeing the same issues once we stop providing services to people outside the village. That stuff died down a lot. And sure, Old Town is a little bit different. There's a lot of stuff going on downtown, Old Town, as we all know. But if we look at other villages, if we looked at St. John's Village, if we look at the BIPOC village over off of Wilder, and if we look at the Water Avenue Village, we see a lot less camping around the villages than we did to begin with. And Andy might be able to talk a little bit about the camping and people congregating around the village and stuff like that too. So did I say that well enough, Andy?
No, that sounds great. I think that our goal is, again, if we treat people like human beings, and that means being clear. I'm a big Brene Brown disciple, and Brene says clarity is kindness. And so to be speaking with individuals who might set up shop around the perimeter and say, listen, we need you to move along because you're not supposed to be here. And we want to help set you up with resources for where we could possibly send you. But the reality is, if you don't leave, then we have to call somebody to enforce the perimeter camping rule. I'm just going to say something, and having been out to that particular site and seeing access to resources that folks might be seeking, I could be proven wrong, and I hope I'm not, but I just don't anticipate campers coming all the way out to Multnomah Village and going around the village site, especially where it's tucked in back behind in that lot. And I also think that slope that's there between the village and residential neighborhood is another barrier in addition to the fencing that will be in place. So I'm just not anticipating a lot of that exterior camping that we feared and that we've seen somewhat. And as Jake said too, because folks won't be able to get resources from us directly, they really have no reason to be there.
Okay. Does anyone have a question before we give Karen her third and final question? Anyone else? Because we can wrap up soon. Remember, there will be another opportunity to ask questions of both Andy and Jake. Am I correct? Tomorrow evening at our general meeting. And that session will be from, I guess, 7:15 to 8 or so, after some general housekeeping up front. Okay, Karen, here you go.
Tony raised sorry, Karen, I'm not trying to cut you off, but Tony did raise their hand.
Thank you, Jake. So, I represent the school. And
Thank you.
So, our concerns are going to be more than people who might be 4 blocks off it, right? And so we might need like some extra time with you guys, because I have an uphill battle, to convince parents that they shouldn't be concerned. But let me ask this question. here and now, can I tell them that in this village, there will not be registered sex offenders or those with previously convicted of violent crime? Can I say that, or can I not? Let's not mince words here. I really need to know that.
Jake, you want to jump on that one? That's been a common question.
Sorry, everyone. I just lost internet, and so I'm back. So, Tony, last thing I heard from you was, wanting to talk more and work through, that you're hearing a lot from parents, and there's just a lot of stuff that we got to talk about. I'm happy to do that. I think that, especially through this good neighbor agreement, we're going to be able to figure out probably a lot of that stuff and work it out. But yeah,
But Jake, let me just interrupt, because Tony's question was very specific, and I
Oh.
think he deserves a really specific answer. So Tony,
Can
why
I-
don't you rephrase that?
Can I tell my parents that in this village, there will be no registered sex offenders, nor people there with violent crimes in their history?
So the way that this is true with most shelters as it is with their other neighbors that are housed in your neighborhood, right? The same laws that protect registered sex offenders from moving into the house across the street from your school protect them from the villagers as well, right? There's not going to be an extra step. We're not going to be, it's the same laws. The same laws protect them.
And there are no laws, really. It's just whatever the parole board assigns to each individual. So,
Then, yeah, and there's, yeah. So I mean, that sounds like a different, like a larger issue, maybe. But for this gets into a weird thing, right? Where we can start talking about, like, there's no data that suggests that our house neighbors are registered sex offenders at a higher rate than our house neighbors, right? And so why should they be treated? So we can start getting into that part of it, but it sounds like that's a problem with the parole side of it, and I'm not a parole person at all. So, but I do appreciate the question, Tony. It's something we hear a lot, and so I understand.
Anyone else? Oh, Bill's got his hand raised. Go, Bill.
Just going back to Tony's point and what he has to do to reassure parents of students at his school and their concerns. Should we be concerned?
So, Andy.
I'm going to tell you that, at least in my history, I would not be concerned. We had the same kind of questions asked previously when we set up in other spaces. I have a vested interest in protecting the rest of the community as well and keeping the community safe. Actually, Tony would love to have an opportunity, if possible, to sit with you and have some very frank conversation about what my role is in that and what the role of our staff is in that, to making sure that y'all feel a sense of safety. We want safety and livability in neighborhoods as well. We're interested in that. So I'm interested in having a more robust conversation about, what does that look like? What does it look like to be in relationship and to have a way to reach out directly if there's any sort of concern that any neighbor has about any villager that's living there. There should be a conversation, and I'm here for that.
I advise you to make sure Karen gets.
Tony, Andy, may I hook you up by email?
please.
Absolutely, please do. I'd love that. I will say this as well. In other village settings, Tony, I'm meeting with a couple of principals from another site. We're having the QA village down in Southwest NATO. I've actually had an opportunity to talk to some of the students. And if that's something too, if it's helpful for kids to hear, for parents to hear, I was an educator, and I'm more than willing to come and to allow, if students want to ask questions, that's great as well. But let's get the relationship thing started and keep the conversation going. I'm here for that.
Yep, thank you.
I'll make sure you guys get hooked up. Karen?
So just so I understand what just happened, it sounds like at this point, the city and the the shelter operator are not able to commit to guaranteeing that there will not be individuals in the facility that have violent crime convictions on their record. Is that correct?
So
I mean, it's just a yes or no.
Karen, so in the same way that we can't guarantee that a housed person living around there is also not allowed to live around there, right?
Yeah, okay. It's just, I'm trying to make sure that that's, yeah, you can't make that guarantee. The question that I actually wanted to ask, though, was one that I saw in our group that did not get asked when it was submitted as a question, but was not asked. It was not my question, and it was, if a resident is invited to depart for behavioral or other reasons, what is that process? Are they simply shown to the gate? How does that work?
More.
Karen, Andy,
Sorry.
Andy said that they make every effort to place
Yeah.
that person in another facility. They have many relationships and with other shelters, and they make their best effort to find a satisfactory placement. And Andy, elaborate on that, please.
Yeah, I mean, I will say it's 9 times out of 10. That's exactly what's going to happen. Is we're going to make sure somebody has another resource. We're in the business of making sure that we do not turn people back out onto the streets, and we certainly don't want to be just dumping them into the neighborhood with no resources. That's not fair to them. It's not fair to the neighbors, and so we make every effort in the exit process. First of all, we have documentation. We're compassionate in the way that we do this. We offer, if we can, we offer multiple other options with either other agencies or other programs within our own agency to be able to make sure that this person isn't turned back out on the street.
That's good to know.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. 2 little points to make as we close the session here. Do join the general meeting tomorrow night from 7 to 9, and you'll have other opportunities to ask Jake and Andy questions. Andy and Jake, thank you so much for coming tonight and for agreeing to be there for our general meeting tomorrow. Also, if you have any flexibility in your schedule, if you're able to, there is another visit to St. John's Village this Saturday. Robin, do we have a time for that? Or does anyone know?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think most people said afternoon was better than morning. Is that right? People who said they wanted to go.
I don't remember. I'm sorry, but watch for
But
notice.
Charmaine was going to post something. She said in her email tonight, she said she would post it as soon as she was able.
There you
Yeah.
go.
So if you have a chance, we would really encourage you to go see the St. John's Village. So with that, Moses, you may end our recording. And thank you all for coming. I